Right. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's so lovely to have you here. I must apologise for the change in time. That's completely my fault. But I'm so glad that you were able to join us. And there is, like I say, there is a recording going out on this as well. So if you miss any part of it, then you will receive the recording. So without further ado, I'm really, really pleased to be able to present you with Jo Brianti, who has very kindly offered to do us a webinar to update us and tell us all about GDPR and data protection. It is such an important part of being a virtual assistant, something that we have to have in place. And if there's anyone who knows about it, it's Jo. So I shall pass you over to Jo from KoffeeKlatch, and I shall leave you in her capable hands.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen and make sure that everybody can see that. Can we all see that? Okay, so
Yep.
I know there are a few of you I've met before, spoken to before, and you know a little bit about me, but I'm Jo Brianti and I'm a data protection specialist. As you can see there from those very fancy badges, I've done an awful lot of training on GDPR. It's probably one of the topics that I read about on a daily basis. Is really something I'm quite passionate about. I started as a VA years ago. I had twin boys, no longer continue working ridiculous hours I was doing as a project manager, and yeah, took the plunge and did it for myself, and it worked around my kids. And then 2017, I discovered GDPR for my own business, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I joined KoffeeKlatch as a partner end of last year, and we formally relaunched KoffeeKlatch as a limited company in its own right earlier this year. So, plan for today is to whip through some of the fundamentals. By no means am I going to be able to cover all of GDPR in 45 minutes, off of 50-minute session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the fundamental things that you all need to be aware of, and then we can ask some questions at the end as and when you're ready. Okay. Question: what is GDPR? So really don't like the way these do this, but anyway, there is two versions now of GDPR. There's the EU version, and you don't need to necessarily worry too much about that unless you are working with clients or contacts that are based in the European Union, the European Economic Area. We've got UK GDPR, which is focused on just UK-based individuals. There's the EU GDPR, which covers anybody in the European Union and the European Economic Area. Now, previous to GDPR, we used to have a range of data protection acts in the UK. They have merged with GDPR, and in the UK, we now have the Data Protection Act 2018. It's all going on this morning, isn't it? I'm really not doing very well on the technical front. I'm normally so much better. So just park that, and we'll move on to the jargon bit. These are the key fundamentals that you all need to understand. GDPR is about personal data. Personal data is things like name, address, telephone number, and it is only about living individuals, okay? So, if you are, let's say, for example, working with a funeral director, a significant portion of the data that comes into a funeral director's might not be relevant under GDPR. So it is living individuals, and it's any piece of data that will identify an individual, but it could also be two pieces of data that merge together. So, for example, if you're working with a company and there's more than one Jo Brianti, the name on its own is not going to identify the individual. But if each of those individuals has a different email address, combination of Jo Brianti 1 at company name, Jo Brianti 2 at company name, plus the name, then identifies somebody. Does that make sense? Next thing, data subject. You'll hear this quite a lot in GDPR. The data subject, it's you, it's me, it's everybody. It's the individual about whom you're collecting and processing data. The data controller. As business owners, we are all data controllers. We decide what data we collect in our business. We decide what data we process, we store, how long we keep it, how we use it, who we share it with. Okay? As a VA, you might also be a data processor because you are working for clients who are data controllers in their own right, and you are doing things for them. Now, the key difference here is the controller makes the decisions about data. The processor does as they're told, to put it very shortly. Okay, so if your client, who is the controller, specifies a certain way that you will work with data and what you will do with that data, you are acting in the role of a processor. Okay. So, in the real world, what does all of that mean? It means that we've got to have a legal reason. You can't collect data just in case it comes in handy. You know, like my dad used to have this phrase, right? It might come in handy, so he collected things and kept it in the shed. You can't do that with data. If you're collecting a piece of data on a form, you have to be using it for some reason, or your client has to be using it, okay? Minimization. Do you really need all the data that you're collecting? Have a look at those collection forms, the onboarding process. Are you asking your clients or contacts for information that realistically you're not using, you're not doing something with? Have a think about that. Security. This is really important. And people very often think that GDPR is about the rules and the regulations. And yes, it is. But it's wider. It's about general data protection. So it's things like, have you got professional grade backup? Have you got professional grade antivirus, malware protection? Are you sharing data securely? How are you sharing your passwords? Who has access? If you're taking on associates, have you checked that they are operating in a secure way and protecting the data that you're sharing with them? Some basic fundamentals, you know. Transparency. It's about being open. It's about being honest. It's about telling clients what you're doing with your data, when, why, how, who. It's about an up-to-date privacy policy. It's about an up-to-date set of terms and business and conditions of business that tell your clients and your associates, what are you doing with their data? How are you managing their data? It's about, we put here right of access, but it's about understanding individuals' rights to their data. And if your client or a contact comes to you and says, I want to see all the data that you hold on me, how are you going to manage that? What are you going to do about it? Make sure you understand what you're going to do about it and how you can deliver what you're required to do. And finally, it's also about how long we keep data and what are we doing about deleting data. And you should only be collecting and keeping data for the minimum period possible. Now, GDPR very helpfully doesn't tell you what period that is. it expects you to work it out. So, for example, anything to do with finance, where personal data is linked to finance, that will have to be 7 years, because you have to keep financial data for 7 years in order to meet the requirements of HMRC and the Companies Act. Okay. Now, within your business, there might be other patterns of data. You might meet somebody in a networking organization, and you might meet them again and again and again and again and again, and you might be adding notes to, oh, coffee with so-and-so, had a chat with them, bumped into them here, building this relationship, nurturing it, and it might take them 6 months before they feel confident enough to say to you, can we have a chat about your services? I really need some help. Yeah, thinking about that know, like, and trust. So you don't want to delete all that data at the point before they've become a client. Yeah. So think about how long you need to keep your data for. Lawful basis for processing. Now, I'm only going to cover the ones that are relevant to VA and relevant to us. There are some others that are really not relevant to businesses our size. They're for public sector organisations like the police, so I'm not going to give you any detail on that. The first one I'm going to talk about is a legal obligation. So I just mentioned that we retain financial data and personal data related to finances for 7 years, because there's a piece of law called the Companies Act and the Finance Act that specifies we need to retain that data for that period of time. So you may work with a client for 6 months, stop working with them because the project is ended, but you still have to retain their data for up to 7 years after you finish working with them in order to meet a legal obligation, even if that's not live data. Okay. Contract. You could be processing data to meet the terms of a contract. Now, you will sign a contract with clients, you will sign a contract with associates, and you may sign a contract with other third parties, such as an IT provider. Maybe you bring somebody on to help you with marketing. The terms of the contract should be clear why you're processing that data. So you're processing that data to deliver VA services, or for them to deliver their technical services to you. Okay? Excuse me. Legitimate interest. Now, this is very often used in the context of marketing, and people will talk about how they have a legitimate interest to add somebody to a mailing list. There are ways of doing that, and there are correct approaches to doing that, but it can be a bit of a grey area. But what you must do is you must do an assessment, and you must decide, well, whose legitimate interest? And the third party, the individual, is there a legitimate interest for them? So, for example, I've got a suite of clients and I want to add them to my mailing list. I may determine that there's a legitimate interest to do that because they're paying me for a retained service every week, every month. And they therefore have an interest in understanding from me what's going on in my business. You know, I might be saying in my newsletter, I've just taken on a new associate, or look at this great feedback I've had, I'm offering this new service. Okay, that might be of interest to your clients. So there is a legitimate interest, but you have to undertake an assessment to make that decision that it is an appropriate lawful basis. Next one is consent. Consent is a very important legal basis, but it has to be used with caution. Consent can be granted by an individual, but it can also be withdrawn. So you have to think very carefully about where you're going to use consent. So, for example, if you are processing invoices, because you want to get paid, let's face it, and you decide that you're going to retain that financial data because somebody has consented, if they remove consent, you have to stop using that data. If you stop using that data, how are you going to invoice them? Okay, so when you use consent, think about where you're using it. I advise people when I'm working directly with clients to think of consent in places like online forms, marketing, and to not use it anywhere where it's mission critical, i.e. finance, because there's a legal obligation or there's a contractual obligation, okay? Now, consent must be informed. You must tell somebody when you collect their data that you're using it for a reason and get their consent. So on your website, if you've got somebody signing up through one of these little forms or widgets for a newsletter, put a little checkbox under there that says, I agree to receive your marketing material, and they have to actively check the box. That's them giving informed consent. Linking that to transparent and transparency, at the same point as they're filling in their detail and before they press the submit button, put another little checkbox that says, I've read your privacy policy. Now, the reality is, because we're all like this, we don't go and read those privacy policies. But if they have checked that box to say that they have read the privacy policy, or that you've made it clear that here is the privacy policy and this is the terms, i.e. the privacy terms, that you are collecting their data, you have achieved the informed and transparent piece around them giving you consent. If an individual chooses not to read that privacy policy, that's up to them. You must make it available at every point. So if you've got on your website a contact form, you know, where people can send you a message or an inquiry, make sure there's a link to your privacy policy there, because that then gives them information and you are being transparent about how you're collecting their data, why you're collecting their data, etc. Now, these are the two that are not relevant to us, but they're here and I'm just going to mention them. Vital interests, that's about you retaining data just in case somebody becomes unwell, or if you're out with a friend and they collapse, you might mention to the paramedic they're a diabetic. That helps them to give them the right treatment that may or may not save their life. Okay? And public task, that's for local authorities, for the police, the NHS, and it's those types of organisations. So I'm not going to cover any more of that. I mentioned this before. I really wanted to kind of drill into this a little bit. One of the things that I do quite a lot with clients is I look at, right at the beginning, their relationship with the individual, and I look at all the data that they're collecting, and I try and understand, why are they asking all those questions? Why are they collecting that data? Is it relevant? So, for example, one of the most common ones is people are collecting Mr. and Mrs. and you know, and is that relevant anymore? It may or may not be. Another one that I discovered with a different client was that they were collecting some just basic health condition, not detailed drilled in. And I said, so why are you collecting, you know, those kind of measurements? And one thing, I'm not really sure, but we might be able to use that to do something. I said, no, you can't, unless it is relevant to your business, unless the purpose is clear, then you shouldn't be collecting it. So you're minimizing it, okay? So this is an important thing to think about as well. It's about the commercial effect of you not necessarily being GDPR compliant. First off, we all, back in sort of 2016, 17, 18, heard about these massive 20 million euro fines. And there was a lot of anxiety around that. The reality is that nobody's going to fine you 20 million euros, right? Particularly if your annual turnover is 30, 40, 50, 10, 50, whatever it is, right? But a fine, let's say a fine of £5,000, when you compare that to 20 million, it sounds quite small, doesn't it? But £5,000, if you're only making 35 or 20 or 15, that's a lot of money. So think about how you're managing your data and consider that you do have to protect it from a financial perspective. There's also the reputation and trust element. Anybody who is investigated, or who is sanctioned, or who is fined by the ICO for any form of data issue, they are listed on a publicly searchable database. So when I work with bigger clients and I do due diligence for them, the first place I look is the ICO's registers. And if they are flagged on that they have had a fine or a sanction, I dig in and I have a little look, and that goes into the due diligence report I prepare. Now, on the face of it, it might be quite minor, but that registration, that, you know, that fine or whatever it is, could be enough for them to lose a contract. So it is really significant that you're aware that if you're sanctioned, it is publicly searchable. And if a client is doing due diligence on you, they could find that there. They might not, but, you know. Some due diligence. Every year, every quarter, maybe, whatever your routine is, you will do a review of your business. Am I meeting my financial targets? Am I working with the type of clients? Am I doing the sort of services that I want to do? Part of that, I'd like you to add a few minutes in to audit your company from a GDPR perspective. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to think, has the software I've started using changed from when, you know, in the last quarter or in the last 6 months or the last year? Have I changed from Microsoft to Google? Have I added some more plugins on my website that are collecting and processing data? Am I still working with all those clients? Should I be archiving any of that data? Should I be thinking about how I'm doing these different things? I'm making it sound like a lot. It really doesn't. It could be half an hour tagged on to the end of whatever process you do for reviewing and monitoring your business. The next thing to think about is GDPR in relation to your client acquisition and retention. When you get a new client, it's important as a VA that you know how to manage their data, because if you get it wrong, you could be creating problems for your client. If you're creating problems for your client, that may have an impact on you getting another client or different clients or growing your business and retaining those clients. It's about trust here. So when you work with the clients and you take them on board, think about that contracting process. Be aware of what's required to manage that client VA controller to processor relationship. And sometimes you'll find that your client is not as aware as you think they might be. So don't be afraid to take the lead and to be clear on what's needed, because you're doing yourself and your client a favour by being in that driving seat. When we think about GDPR compliance, we think about hardware, but think about your laptop. How secure is your laptop? Are you using, antivirus? Have you got BitLocker or FileVault enacted on it? How are you sharing data from your laptop? Are you using USB drives, external hard drives? How secure are they? Are you encrypting the data that you put on your USB, or now, but putting it onto a CD-ROM, and those kinds of things? So think very carefully about your laptop. Is it current? Is it modern? Is it running the most up-to-date version of the software? And that links in nicely with software. For those of us who use Windows, we know just how much of a pain in the backside the Windows updates can be. Frequently, they will start or they will flag at the wrong time of day when you're busy, and it can be a real pain, but it is hugely important. Those updates patch security issues. So make sure that you're running updates. If you're a Mac user, and I have to say I'm not a Mac user and I'm not a Mac specialist, I know that Mac regularly run out updates and new software. So make sure that you're running these updates. I normally run mine at 5 o'clock on a Friday. I leave my laptop on and it automatically runs at 5:30, I can't remember, but it's somewhere about that, as soon as I've down tools on a Friday. So any updates are running and they're done, and the laptop can switch itself on and off as it needs to run those updates. And the biggest risk to data protection is you and me, is everybody in this room. It is people. People make mistakes. People turn around from their laptop in their co-work site or their cafe, and then they leave their laptop open and turn around and it's been stolen, or somebody's been taking it, or something like that. So be very careful. Remember, you are the individual. Just get into the habit of being careful, locking your screen, thinking carefully about what you do with data, how you do it, and how you manage it. So, thinking about GDPR and people, it's about contracts. Contracts between you and your client, contracts between you and your associate. And those contracts are not just about the terms of business, about I'm going to do X number of hours, I'm going to deliver Y services, and you're going to pay me shekel. It's also about what is the data relationship? What data are you sharing? How are you sharing it? How are you protecting it? Okay. Make sure that you've got policies and procedures in place. And we're all busy, small business owners. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you are going to have 4 A4 sides to write a policy on data retention. You should have a little folder in your SharePoint, your OneDrive, wherever you keep your documents, Google Drive, that's called policies and procedures. And your policy for data retention could be 3 paragraphs that says, I keep finance details for 7 years. I keep my customer data for X period. I keep this for that period. That's it. That's a policy. That's all it needs to be in your business if you are small. As you grow, as you take associates on, you might have to expand on those because your policies might have to talk about how you are managing data with a team. But certainly, as you're kind of moving through your business, don't think that you've got to write reams. You've just got to know what the plans are for your business and have them documented so that you can reference them. Training. Attending a session like this where we talk about GDPR, that's training. It's building your awareness, it's building your understanding. Again, I'm not suggesting here that you're going to spend all day, every day, reading the latest GDPR blogs or, you know, cybersecurity options, but you can think about how are you keeping up to date? Are you going to free webinars that are accessible that help you? Monitoring. Are you monitoring what's happening in your business with regard to data? Do you know, where the data's going? And, if you take on a new piece of software in your business for whatever reason, have you done some due diligence around that? Do you know where that data is going? Is it being stored in the UK? Is it being hosted in the United States? Think about all those little monitoring activities that we do as part of our business. And finally, improving and changing. Your business is not static. If it's static, that might be not the best place for it to be. You might be quite happy with how things are, but in terms of GDPR, you need to think how you're improving your policies, your processes, your training, your operations, and they will change over time. Yeah, you might start off doing a whole range of services, and bit by bit you remove services that you don't really like or that don't seem profitable to you, and you focus and you niche and you grow with that. You might change your business by taking on associates. Whenever you make a change in your business, come back to GDPR. What does this mean for my GDPR policies, processes? Do I need to do more training? Do I need to update my knowledge because I've done what I want to do? Okay. Excuse me. Common problems. Using data collected for one reason for something completely different. Now, in the course of a business, we might collect data, quite a wide range of data. And we might specify reasons for collecting that data. You should not collect it for one reason. Tell your clients that you're going to use it for one reason, and then use it for something materially different. So, as an example, you've got a client who runs a garage, and he's got a database of all the clients that have brought their cars in to have a service or to have a new tyre or whatever it is. And he suddenly decides that he's going to give that entire database of contacts to his wife so that she can promote her dressing business, for example. That is a sample or an example of data being collected for one reason and being used for another. You can't and you shouldn't do it at all. Sending them an email to the wrong person. Who's done it? You've all done it. You know, you reply all and then you think, oh, that shouldn't have gone to him. It's the most common thing that goes wrong with data. And I probably see emails or Facebook messages or LinkedIn messages at least once a week from somebody who said, I've just done the most horrendous thing and I've sent. It's yes, it's a fault, but you are a human being. And if it goes wrong, fess up, speak to the client, speak to whoever you need to speak to, apologise. I know I don't know enough about Google or Macmail or any of these other systems, but in Outlook, if I realise quickly enough, I can try and recall all the messages before somebody's had a chance to see them and read them, and I can delete it. Doesn't always work, but I could do that. The severity of this depends very much upon what the data is that you've just sent to the wrong person. So, you know, if it's a reply all saying, oh, well, here's the meeting minutes or something like that, there could be some sort of commercially sensitive data in there, but it might not be as bad as if you sent an email with the names, addresses, and bank details or credit card details of the entire workforce to the entire workforce. Okay, so don't immediately panic. Think about what data is it. If it's just a bit of egg on your face, apologise, fess up, and do whatever you can to just recover the data. And that's all you can do. Losing files or paperwork. So this is less common now from a paperwork perspective, because less and less, there's less and less use of paper records, right? But you could equally, if you're using USB sticks, lose the USB, and that could then be picked up somewhere, and that data be accessed. You could leave the external hard drive that you've been using to store data in the co-working site that you use or the cafe. It is still lost files, okay? This is kind of really common as well. A few years ago, there's been quite a few over the years of this type of thing, but a government minister left a series of CD-ROMs with an entire database of government data that included names, addresses, telephone numbers, all sorts, on a train. More recently, we've had the accidental loss of files in Northern Ireland, which that was really significant because it put the lives of police officers at risk. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you could be in that situation, but I'm showing you that there could be significant consequences. And sometimes as a VA, you might not necessarily have the full understanding of the data that you're working with for your client. So it is really important that you take care about the files, and if you are working in a public arena, that they are secure at all times. Oh, so this is the next one. Losing devices, mobiles and laptops. I see no end of times people in the cafe working, and they'll have their mobile phone on the edge of the desk next to them. They're deeply engrossed like this with their laptop. Now, anybody could walk past and just pick up that laptop. You know, you don't have to be kind of coy about it. You can just knock it off the table and into your pocket easily. I've seen other people working in a cafe, just a general sort of Costa coffee type place, get up, leave their laptop and go and order a sandwich and a cup of coffee and stand in a queue for almost 10 minutes because it's lunchtime. And their laptop is completely unattended. That's the easiest way for you to lose your laptop, your mobile, and there's all that client data on there. So if your laptop is not secure, if your mobile is not secure, that could be data accessed by people that you don't want it to be. Now this is quite a topical one because I've had a number of conversations recently about virus emails, phishing, and spam messages through LinkedIn and Facebook, where they send you a message that says your Facebook page has been locked. You have to click this link to re-access it or to reopen it or whatever. It's really important that you just don't do that. Because the minute you click on that link, it might look like Facebook, but it is a fake website, and it is just either putting something nasty on your laptop that's going to, what they call, open a back door, which means people can go in and out as they choose, plucking data away, or it is, just encouraging you, to give login information away. And when you give that login information away, they can do whatever they like because they can log into your account. I've got some additional information and a blog that will tell you exactly what to look for. So I'll share that later with Gwen. And then you can put that into SVA and it can go out with the recording for you. And it explains what you need to look for in a phishing email. And it'll give you tips on what things should look like or shouldn't look like. Excuse me. This is really important as well. Accessing personal data you don't need. When you're working with a client, if they haven't locked down their systems, or if they're using systems that don't allow you to sort of segregate data, or even worse, they've allowed you to work on their systems using their login so that you've got the full ownership rights, just make sure that you're only accessing the personal data that is relevant to the work you're doing. Don't get tempted to have a little route around and have a look at other personal data. There was a situation where a social worker was prosecuted, lost her job and lost her license to operate because she was looking at the wrong data that had nothing to do with anybody on her caseload. And again, she's named on the ICO register because they sanctioned her, she was fined, lost her job, everything. So think very carefully about the data that you're accessing for clients. Do I need to know this? Is this the right place? Make sure you're very clear on that. Reporting data breaches. So as a small business owner yourself, you need to understand what should happen in the case of a data breach as a business owner, okay? And a lot of the time you are going to be reliant on organizations, let's say, such as Microsoft or Google or Actual or Monday or ClickUp or whoever it is, emailing you to say, we've had a data breach, we've had a data incident, and they should communicate to you what the level of concern is around that. And you need to make a decision around that, around is what they're telling me a problem for me? And it could be that no, it isn't. And 9 times out of 10, it really isn't, because they've got it under control, they've nipped it under the bud. But You could also have a data breach where you caused the data breach, in which case you need to think about, is this a concern? Is this an issue? Do I need to talk to somebody about this? Do I need to speak to my clients about this? Or can I just make a note of it in my records and then make sure that I don't do that again, because I'm going to put a new safeguard in place, okay? With your client, make sure that you have some sort of arrangement, or you know what their expectation is of you if something goes wrong. Do they give you a set period of time in which to report to them that something's gone wrong? So you need to think about that in your relationship with your client. And not quite sure why this has ended up here. That's interesting, but anyway. The other thing to think about here is, when you're working with your client, is you as the VA might receive a subject access request. So I might contact you and I might say, hello, VA, Executive Assistant. I want all the data that client number 1 holds about me. You need to know what your client's requirements are in that situation of you. First off, I would say to you that you have to speak to them on an urgent basis, because there's only 30 days. Once a person has made a request, there's 30 days to respond to it. So once they've made the request, you need to speak to your client. And they should take over and they should manage that, maybe with your support. For you as business owners, if I come to you and I say, hey, Pip, I want to know all the data that you hold about me, the first thing I would expect Pip to do is say, who are you? Can you prove your identity? Now, the quickest, easiest, dirtiest way of doing that is having a Zoom call and getting somebody to, well, look at this, my Holland and Barrett car, but stand in front of the camera with the passport or with the driving license and check that the face matches what's on here. If it doesn't, then you can decline. If you give away data to somebody without checking their ID, you've created a data breach, possibly. So do check their ID. Once you've checked their ID, you've got 30 days to respond to them and provide the data that you hold on them. So that's just DRM records. It could be any email communication. It could be any invoices. And you have to agree a way that you will give that data to them. Usually, it could be a Google Drive, SharePoint folder, whatever, however you do that. But you need to think, as small business owners, how would I respond if somebody came to me? How would I check their ID? Does that spill into a breach? And importantly, as you are processors for your clients, what do they want you to do about these things? The key thing here, and the fundamental thing here, is that GDPR is a process or a series of processes. If you set up effective processes and you think carefully about some of the points that I've said to you today, then you are going to have fewer problems with GDPR than somebody who does nothing. Okay. And everybody knows where I am. Feel free to connect. Feel free to kind of contact KoffeeKlatch. There's a range of GDPR support services and options available to you. So, yeah, just please give us a shout. Don't struggle alone. If you feel like it's a struggle, please reach out. Okay. Gwen, how was that?
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jo. Really, really helpful. Right, we've got some questions.
Okay.
But they keep hopping about in my chat box because when someone comments on them, they move. So I'm going to go down my chat box and try and read them in the order that I can see them.
Okay.
So don't worry if we haven't got to yours yet, you will come up. So the first one is, which email system would you say is the best for sending sensitive data for encryption? Proton or Egress or anything else? What would you suggest?
I don't email personal data at all. Actually, no, I've just realised, is my video switched off?
Oh, there you are. Hello.
Talking all that time, and nobody shouted that my video was off.
It's
I'm
all
so
good.
sorry.
The important thing was the words. It's fine.
So I no longer email anything, right? And the reason for this is that email goes from me in my office here in West London, and it might bounce over to a server in France, and then it might bounce over to Australia, then it might bounce off to New York, and it might land in Gwen's inbox a few hours later. So I don't attach files very often. And if I do, so I might have attached this this presentation today because there's nothing interesting in it. But I might, if it was a file of names and addresses, put that in a secure folder and email a link, a safe, secure link that only Gwen can open because it's based on her email address. So it's not about the tool that you're using, it's about the practice. So it doesn't matter whether you're using Outlook, Proton, Egress, Gmail, Thunderbird, or any of these other options. It is about the process. Okay? Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've got a client who is a solicitor, and they ask that I use Egress because that's what they use. And obviously, you are tied in to an extent with what the client uses, aren't you? But
yeah,
you know,
and maybe I'll caveat this. If your client tells you to email things, your client is paying your bill, so you do what they tell you to do because it's their business and it's their risk, and that's how it is. What you do in your business and the process that you do in your business or the process I do in my business might be very, very different. Okay. Now, I saw a question pop up about what do I use. I started using Microsoft products a few years ago when we were back on late version 2. So I have a wide awareness of other tools, but I always go back to Outlook. It just is my, I suppose, ideal product, really. And I use SharePoint, and I send secure SharePoint links, and I don't send what I call an open link that anyone can use. I send a link that only, for example, Gwen could use because it's linked to her email address. So if I sent it to Gwen and her VA opened it using a different email address, they wouldn't have access to those files. And that's how I operate. Slightly different if I'm sending a set of slides or something. If it's personal data, that's how I operate. And that is how I recommend people operate. But if your client says something different, they pay your bill, you do what they tell you to do because it's their risk, not yours. Okay, next.
Lovely. Right, next. Do you have a preference of antivirus software? I was saying to Jane that I use AVG, but there's loads of good ones out there.
So I have a bit of a thing about antivirus, right? First off, you must pay for it. That's it. First off, you must pay for it. If you don't pay for it, it won't be as up to date. And you can't guarantee that the latest nasties that are floating around in the ether are covered by your antivirus. The next thing I say is I avoid Kaspersky because it's got Russian backers and I'm a very cynical person, and you know, the stiffness and all those kinds of things. I don't know that it's a bad product. I absolutely don't. It's just a personal view. That my go-to tool is Norton,
Okay.
and Norton has a suite of tools,
Mm.
and I like Norton, but it's not for everybody. Some people are using, oh God, that name's just gone right from my head, just as I was about to say it. But anyway, the key thing is make sure you're paying, make sure it's a reasonably well known. Sophos is another one that, you know, I know quite a bit about. But it is hugely, hugely important that you pay for it so that it's current, it's up to date. And like I said in the presentation, if they send you a note about an update, run the update, because it is addressing the current nasties that are out there.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay,
Okay.
next.
Right, okay. Another one from Jane. I only have one client, a family member. What do I need as a starter for VA contracts? I've given her the link actually to KoffeeKlatch contracts for that. She did want to know whether in the basic pack it covered you for GDPR, which I was...
The contracts, all of KoffeeKlatch contracts will come with the relevant data protection elements in it, and you have to decide which bits that you need to use. All those contracts come with guidance, there's videos, there's content. And if you get stuck, if you're a KoffeeKlatch customer, go into the Facebook group, tag myself or Annabelle and say, I'm really stuck. I don't know how I do this. I can't make up my mind. We will come to you and answer your question. That's what you pay for as part of your contract.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yes. Alison asks, do we have to advise a past client if and when we delete their data after working with them? Now, I have it in my contract that says we keep your data for 3 months after we stop working for you, and then it will be deleted unless you ask us to keep it otherwise. But what's your suggestion?
That's very brave. 3 months, great. Oh, hello.
Is because they've come back to me before and said, "Oh, have you got?" And I've got to cut off now. But
So,
yeah.
so here's the thing, right? We've got to sort this kind of data question out. In the relationship that you have with a client, you may have a wide range of data. You might have the files that you've created, which could be slides, it could be Canva, it could be whatever. And then there's the data that contains personal data. There's the data about your finances and things like that. Now, however you determine, like Gwen saying she retains files for 3 months and then deletes them, that feels about right. So, you know, the Canva documents that I've created, the PowerPoint slides, the Word documents, there's plenty of time for you to come to me and ask for them. However, what Gwen won't be doing is deleting the finance details, the invoices, the contractual elements, because they need to be retained for under a legal obligation for 7 years. So if Gwen stops working with me, in 3 months she'll delete all those ordinary files, and then the rest of it she will archive and put in a legal obligation folder or whatever she calls it, because she has to retain that just in case HMRC come and have a chat with her. So that's how you do it. But the time span, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, that is all dependent on your business, your way. So you choose. There's, you know, you could give them a month to download any of the files that you've been working on. Or, you know, I know of another VA who, as part of her sort of offboarding process, she emails and says, here's all your files, you've got 7 days, and then they'll all be deleted. And that's it. Because, you know, for her, there's nothing wrong with that at all. So your approach, your business.
Okay, lovely. Last question I have on here.
Okay.
So, oh, Alison says thank you. And a good point to put it on my contract. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Please.
last question. Oh, sorry. Go
Yeah,
on.
go on. No, I was going to say on that point, if you're using the KoffeeKlatch contracts, there's the booking form. So in the booking form, you can put these kinds of terms in there, and the whole point of the booking form is that you're making those special arrangements between you and the client, right? And that booking form, you might have an arrangement with client number one, and it might be slightly different to client number two. So use your booking form to say, at the end of our working relationship, I keep your files for 7 days, you delete them, and then I delete them, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
how you do it. Sorry, Gwen, I jumped in.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good to know. So what about things like you've got WeTransfer and Send GB and things like that that only retain your data for about 7 days or whatever you ask it to do. Are those safe to use? Would you recommend those for sending across any personal data, or is that just not the way to do it?
So I have only ever used WeTransfer for sending bulk items like videos and large volumes. Again, I can look into this because I don't know much about WeTransfer. I was introduced to it by a VA when I was trying to transfer a very large kind of non-personal data document, and I couldn't get it through the email.
Yeah.
And I don't use it generally, as I say. I send a personal link. It's locked. It's secure. That's my personal choice. I will, and I'll make a note to look up WeTransfer. And I'll
where it's based and what have you. I mean, I guess it's
when you said WeTransfer.
There's WeTransfer. There's Send GB is another one.
Okay, I'll have a look at the security and what it
that'd be
says
great.
on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I can feed that back to people then. I mean, I don't tend to use it for personal data. I tend to use it like you for the large things that won't go in an email. But I guess it's about due diligence and at least accepting that it doesn't store that data in the cloud for an eternity. There is a cutoff with it. And if you pay for it, you can determine how long it stores that data for. So if it's something that's very secure, you can say, just keep it for an hour and allow my client to download it. So yeah, it can be useful in that respect. But again, depends where it floats around in the ether too, doesn't it? So
and that's always the thing with cloud technology. You know, I remember many moons ago when cloud technology was really, really in its infancy, and it was really a scary. Cloud technology was really as scary then as AI was, or is now. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how dangerous AI is, right? I remember people talking about cloud technology in the same kind of way, that you know, it was going to take over the world, it was going to make hundreds of us redundant, and it was the most dangerous thing on the face of the earth. We had to keep it on our desktop or something like that. So, you know, with all of these technologies, I will never tell you that there is no risk. There is always risk. Getting out of bed is a risk, but it's how you manage and mitigate that risk. And it's about understanding what you need to do in order to understand the risks and how to mitigate them. Now, there's one thing I wanted to say, Gwen, is I know that there was a conversation or a question earlier about emails and stuff, and I touched on it a little bit. On Wednesday evening, I'm running a free event with KoffeeKlatch on email marketing and GDPR and what data you can put on your mailing list. So I'll be touching on the legitimate interest and consent there. So if anybody wants to know a bit more about how they do that, especially if you're doing email marketing for your clients, please register on the website, and then you can get a recording if you can't come to the actual event on Wednesday evening.
I'll be putting links in the email with the replay, so you can find all these weird and wonderful things that we're telling you about. So yeah. Well, there are no more questions in the chat. I think we've exhausted everybody. But thank you so much for that, Jo. It's such a, when you're first coming in as a VA and someone says you've got to think about GDPR and data protection, it's a bit scary. And you know, you kind of think, how the heck can where do I even start? So just hearing it like that and making it understandable is just really helpful for everything. So thank you.
I'm around, you know, anybody can connect with me on LinkedIn. If anybody wants, you know, if they've got a specific question that for whatever reason they haven't been able to ask today, drop me a note. I'll give you 15 minutes and we'll have a quick chat about that if you want to. And yeah.
Great. Well, Jo is also in our Facebook group as well,
yes,
on the SVA members Facebook group. So if you ask any GDPR questions in there, I always go, Jo, help.
Yeah.
So she's there to ask if you need anything too. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for biding with us as we change the time. And I hope to see you again soon.